I had the privilege of meeting our next speaker and his lovely wife, Penny, when I came to Claremont, California in August of 1994, fresh from Hillsdale College and ready to study for my PhD in political science. At the time, he was the president of the Claremont Institute. He didn't offer any formal classes back then, but as he does now, but he did a lot of teaching anyway, informally. So I learned a lot from him about statesmanship and political philosophy, whether in informal conversations or listening to his speeches. Back then, when he was the president of the Institute, I used to think he was a college professor trapped in a think tank president's body. Now I think he's a college professor trapped in a college president's body. Of course, all joking aside, those two things go together at Hillsdale, as they used to in most other, well, at all colleges and universities until recent times. Anyway, our students are fortunate to have him as a professor and a president, and I count it as a privilege to have been able to work with him now for 15 years, plus, I think, almost 15 years at Hillsdale College. He will be speaking today on the topic Conservatism and Constitutionalism. Please welcome the 12th president of Hillsdale College, Dr. Larry P. Arnn.
That Tim is tall, isn't he? Thank you, Tim. Thank you for being here. And wasn't Heather heroic? I'm thinking about my maturity this week because it's present, but also I've watched Larry Kudlow become a gentle human being. He's always been brilliant and always been good, but now he's nice. And I've watched Heather grow up and become a power. That was really great, and thank them both. Doug Jeffrey always picks these topics, and they always call up the speakers and tell them what to say, and they never do that with me. They just assign me a topic, and I don't know if they figure I'll say whatever I please, or if they figure we've worked together so long and studied together so long, I'll know exactly what they mean. And I always have confidence about that, except last night, Doug broke into verse. So I don't know what's going on with the boy, and I don't know what he wants me to do. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'm to talk about conservatism in the Constitution, and that's a problem. There's something interesting about that. The Constitution is one of the greatest liberal documents in human history. The greatest living, very greatest Constitution, greatest written Constitution by far. There isn't anything close to it. To last so long, do so much. The principles behind it, expressed in the Declaration of Independence, are fundamentally important. And they're the most beautiful political principles ever written. And they're not conservative in their nature. The word liberal comes from the word free. Why aren't we liberals? So I'm going to try to explain that. And I'm going to explain it mainly by talking about two people. They are teachers of mine, and they have both died in the last 6 weeks. One of them is Harry Jaffa, a student of Aristotle and Abraham Lincoln, and Winston Churchill. Thomas Aquinas, Shakespeare, great teacher of political philosophy. He wrote Barry Goldwater's Extremism and Defense of Liberty speech. And the other is Sir Martin Gilbert. And Sir Martin Gilbert he died just 2 weeks ago. He was the official biographer of Winston Churchill. He wrote 88 serious books of history. And these two men have a very great deal to do with this question of the disposition of conservatives to constitutions and to the American Constitution. Because one of them did a very great act of recovery, which I will describe to you. The other one did the same. The first one, a recovery of the thinking and meaning of the American Revolution. And the second one, of the life and career of Winston Churchill. And I've been studying Winston Churchill for a long time. These two men, I should tell you, they're incredibly sophisticated influential in my life and sophisticated people. We have the papers of both of them at Hillsdale College now. And I met my wife, Penny, aforementioned Penny back there, the mother of our children, working in the home of Martin Gilbert a long time ago in Oxford. And so since Harry Jaffa introduced me to Martin Gilbert, and Martin Gilbert introduced me to Penny, they can both take credit for my marriage and felt that I owed them everything and would say so. And I acknowledged the fact. Professor Jaffa, who was more personally assertive than Martin Gilbert, would also take credit for my children. And I would say, well, but she did that. And they would say, yeah, but how'd you meet her? So this is a significant thing, and both of them are crucial to understanding where we are in the world today, in my opinion. Let me say where that is. Heather just described a crisis, right? And she's, by the way, she's a very intelligent young woman. And she just gets better with every passing year, which means that her character is good. And so I've known her a long time and watched her talk for a long time, and I never saw her do better than she did today. And I expect in a year or two, when I see her again, she'll do better yet. She's that sort. And she hinted at some element of despair there at the end. These problems are very deep, and they are what I said last night. The government, the principle of self-rule, the principle that all men are created equal, focuses on this simple thing. Some of us are smarter than others, and some of us are taller than others, and some of us are richer than others. But we've all got this one thing, and it makes us human. We can talk. Studying with Professor Jaffa 400 years ago, it was an electric experience because I studied with a student of his by accident in undergraduate school. I'm not a lawyer today. I love to say I didn't do that. I decided to get an education. But Professor Jaffa was not a really great teacher. He was disordered and self-centered. First time I met him, the summer of '74, I was given the great honor of going to pick him up to take him to go to the first class. And Peter Schramm, my brother-in-law, took me. And so there we walk in the thing, and I'm going to meet this great man, author of the Goldwater speech, author of the best book about Abraham Lincoln, and he appears in his boxer shorts. And he can't remember who I am, and he can't remember what the class is we're going to have. And I think to myself, golly gosh, what have I done? And I'm just a kid, too, so I didn't expect red carpets or anything. I just thought maybe he would recognize that I had corresponded with him. I can remember the first thing he said in class, and it bears on this point what it is that makes us human. He said he started the first class, and he hadn't prepared in any way except by his whole life, and the class was on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which I teach now and which I read. I can't tell you how many times I've read it, but I think it might be once a year since 1974. Anyway, I know it pretty well. And he says, here's how he starts the class. He says, when people get old like me, they make a list of the 100 greatest books. But that's foolish because nobody lives long enough to master 100 great books. Can't be done, he said. I have a list of the 3 greatest books. What follows is a little cryptic. I've thought about it for years. I remember every word of it. And it was, 41 years ago. He said, Aristotle's Politics would require some translation to be fully relevant to modern times. Sounds like he's excluding it. He said the Bible is its own kind of thing. Maybe he was excluding it. Plato's Republic would be on any such list. said the word Shakespeare. And it hung in the air for a while, and he said, Socrates said that a poet would arise who could write both tragedy and comedy. Seems to include Shakespeare. Certainly, I know he did. And then he held up the ethics, and he said, this is a perfect book, he said. And we are going to read this book. And we are going to find out what we are. Not everything in class was as good as that with him, because, as I say, he was disordered. He was just brilliant. But it would happen 2 or 3 times a term, out of 15, that he would start explaining something fundamental to you. And my favorite thing, I heard him explain it many times, was what it is human beings can do that makes them human. We can talk, is the short answer. It's actually true that because we can talk, it means we can, how do you give a name to a thing, right? How do you know it's a bottle? Because there's many bottles. They look all different, right? And you never really see the bottle. But once you can recognize that that's a bottle, you can use the term bottle. Professor Jaffa referred to this as the miracle of the common noun. You can never explain how you can do it. Man, 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 woman, 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 right? They're all different. And yet, in an instant, you can see what they are and give them a name. And once you can give them a name, you can communicate in a radically different way than any other being. Aristotle says animals, it's in the Politics, he says, animals use their voices to indicate pleasure and pain. But human beings use theirs to describe the just and the unjust, the advantageous and the disadvantageous. And do you see how we do that about the just and the unjust? If this is a bottle, then it's in a category of things, and it would need to be treated according to this category. And that phenomenon is vitally important because you can eat a pig, but you can't eat a human being. And that's because you can know the difference between them. And they have different natures, and they're indicated to be treated in different ways. That's how justice arises. So you learn this from Professor Jaffa. And he loved the Declaration of Independence because he said that your rights are written in that capacity. And they don't matter how smart you are, or how much money you've got, or who your parents were, or what color you are. If you can do that thing, then you are entitled to all the rights of the human being. And from that fact grows these tremendous things. I grew up in Arkansas, and my dad was a school teacher and a learned man, only one in his generation or before to go to college. And I didn't think he was wise until I became mature because I was too stupid. But now I remember what I learned from him. And I didn't know I was learning. Heather said boys need their daddies and their mothers. I didn't know I was learning these things from him. And I was good at learning, and I got really good grades. But I know how I was raised. I was raised to think that it didn't matter anything except that I was a human being and was supposed to be a good one. And everything hinged on whether I did that or not. I was born to do whatever I could do. And I always thought I could do a lot. And we didn't have any money. We lived in a little town in Arkansas. There were creditors and stuff, and I just thought that's how everybody lived. I had a friend that, I still have him. His son has graduated from our college. He's a medical doctor now. And I thought he was rich. I know what it is to be rich now. I always thought, by the way, I was going to be rich. And I am now what I thought I was going to be. I just know now it's not rich. There probably are some rich people in this room, but I happen to know most of you are not really rich. You're just generous. Thank you. But you see, that stuff, right? Grew up in America, you learn to love that stuff. That's what's being taken away. Harry Jaffa is the one who started the movement to make the modern conservative movement understand the greatness of all that stuff. Because in the beginning, the conservative movement, which started in the late 40s and 50s, it was on about German economists, and they're good too, I love them, and about all kinds of things, but it wasn't on about the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the substance of American citizenship. And that was because a lot of those people suspected that those things were not good things. Because the account on the right, when I started graduate school, of the American founding was that it was a low, solid thing that was as good as you could get in the modern world. And Harry Jaffa is the one who thought that through and saw not. And I'll tell you how he did it. I happened to be there. It happened, the turn came in the summer of 1976. And I was a student there, and I really wanted to learn from him, and the other students did too. But I was so radical about it that I took up bicycle racing. I've ridden a bicycle 25,000 miles. Why? Because he did it, and you could be around him all the time, and you could get him to answer your flippant questions, which in class sometimes you couldn't get him to do. And I would go over every summer, and he was writing an attack on a conservative man, Irving Kristol. Because Irving Kristol had written this thing about how the American Revolution is low but solid. And Professor Jaffa had it for the first time. He'd been reading Lincoln. He'd started reading it for himself. And what did he find? You ever hear the story of George Washington at the Battle of Monmouth or the Battle of Princeton? I mean, it's like a story about Achilles, except maybe better. Marching his horse at the British at Princeton, not knowing whether anybody was coming with him, riding through American troops being routed, and if they had been routed, it would have destroyed the advantage of the victory at Trenton, and then we could have closed the first year of the Revolutionary War without anything looking like victory. Had to win. And then he took Trenton, just a miracle. They were drunk and asleep. And then he had to preserve it because he thought, we got to win something. He said to somebody that morning, George Washington, we'll be dead by nightfall anyway. We got to go ahead. We're late, said the guy. What's his name? Plover. Said to him, a New Englander who's good at boats, he said, General, we're late. You said we had to be there by dawn. And Washington said to him, go ahead. Doesn't matter. We'll be dead by nightfall if we don't win today anyway. So then the next day they had to go up to Princeton. And he gets there, and they're running, and he just walks through them. And he doesn't say anything to them. He was a very big man, very beautiful man. And Fitzwilliam, his adjutant, records the story. He gets close to the British. There's an exchange of fire. Fitzwilliam says he covers up his face with his hat. He can bear to look upon the destroyed George Washington. And George Washington was a tremendous horseman. And when the smoke cleared, Fitzwilliam looks and he sees that he's sitting his horse just as he was and making the same steady progress that he was. And there's been a volley, and he's been right in the middle of it, and he's still going. And the Americans have formed up behind him without him saying anything to them. And the British run away. Now, that man was picked to be the President of the United States. You couldn't call the Constitutional Convention. Never mind that Alexander Hamilton and James Madison are alive and Thomas Jefferson is alive and they are all working on it. Jefferson from Paris. Never mind that. If Washington won't go, that man won't go. It can't be done. And the reason is he is a picture of the moral virtues, one of the greatest in all of history. And so that means then all of a sudden, and Harry Jaffa, more than anybody else, is the fellow who discovered this. And I happened to be there when he did it. What a privilege. The excitement of it. He delivered his paper, an attack on a bunch of conservatives who'd written that America's corrupt and low and you can't expect much from it, but by golly, we like it because it'd be a lot worse if it was communist. That was their argument. And I watched 400 people at the American Political Science Association in 1976 come into the room for this argument. And I watched my teacher wipe the floor with them. And you know, I learned my belligerence at the hands of a master. I got a Rotary Fellowship, and Professor Jaffa had met this man, Martin Gilbert, young then, the official biographer of Winston Churchill. And the great Churchill papers were in Oxford, and only to be used by him, which I didn't know at the time but soon learned, had the whole world of historians up in arms against Martin Gilbert because A, he was hogging these papers, and B, he didn't write his books about them and their books. He wrote the book out of the original source documents. I met him in a coffee shop. Professor Jaffa had done him a favor, so he had to meet me. And I had this fancy fellowship to go study in England. And I can remember every word that was spoken. And he was like a little, you know, he didn't look like, I thought he would look like Neville Chamberlain. You should see a picture of him. He's a little Jewish guy. Very bright, very powerful, very tremendous conversationalist. And I meet him, and I'm young and stupid. And so what I should have said was, I want to work in the Churchill papers. But I didn't think that I did. I thought I'm going to write a doctoral thesis about Churchill's political thought, and that's to be found best in published sources. So I don't need it. And he said, you know, in a great kindness, he said, can I help you? We had met, by the way, in a library called the Wiener Library up close to Regent Park. And that's a library where some little Jewish ladies keep a bunch of Nazi books. He was looking at one when I first walked up beside him. And it was open, and it was a children's book, a school book. You know, Heather said, what do we teach in the young? Nazism is a branch of this historicism that has America in its grip. Communism is a branch. The Confederacy and its idea that slavery is good is a branch. And he showed me this book, and this book was about some little German kids with blonde hair going into a butcher shop. It's a little school book, a little kid book, colored pictures. And the butcher, it was a Jew, looked like Bluto in the Popeye thing with stubble. And Martin Gilbert said, I said, what are you looking at? Oh, hi, you know, what are you looking at? We're whispering, and he showed me, and he said, notice, he said, these sides of pork. The Jewish butcher is selling pork. And, you know, the story, this, by the way, this book was edited by the agency run by Julius Streicher, who's one of the worst people ever to live, one of the senior Nazis. He said, notice that the story was about the butcher killing the Christian children when they came in, the Aryan children when they came in. He said, notice that the skin color of the sides of pork hanging are the same as the skin color of the Jewish butcher. So we see that, right? And he shows me that. And I'm learning that he's interested in that stuff. And then we walk down to the London School of Economics and we have coffee. And he says, can I help you? And I said, no, I don't really need anything. It's really stupid, you know. I said, but, and it emerged while I was talking to him that I'd been reading his books. I could talk about them. And I give you a clue, if you ever meet authors or have a teacher, nothing better than knowing their work. They really like that. And it's the reason the faculty is happy at Hillsdale College. The students pay attention and learn and hold them in respect. It's an idyllic life. So I had that for him, but I didn't really want to get digging in those papers very much. I said, but I'm here in London, and I will help you in any way. Call me anytime. I will look up things. I'll do whatever you want me to do. And he looked at me kind of puzzled, like I was a Martian. And he said, would you like a job? And I said, yes. And he said, when could you start? It was Friday. I said, Monday. I didn't say, what would I do? I didn't say, how much would you pay me? He said, good, see you Monday. He left. I had to chase him and say, by the way, where should I go? And he said, the Map House, Harcourt Hill, Oxford. Oxford. He said, yeah, the cab driver will know where it is. Oxford. Should I live in Oxford? He said, that would probably be better. So I moved over the weekend. The lady who was managing the documents and the correspondence downstairs kept making grammatical mistakes. And she wanted a permanent job. She didn't have one yet. And he showed me one of them and said, what's wrong with that? And I pointed out what it was. And he said, everyone knows that? And I said, I don't know. I know it. He said, do Americans know things like that? She had written slimming the tide instead of stemming the tide. And I said, well, I don't know, I do. He said, this lady will not do. And he let her go. And 5 or 6, 8 days later, he said, arrived there to get coffee. He said, there's a new lady tomorrow. I said, oh, a new lady? He said, yes, she's very smart. 3 A-levels from Rodin. I said, well, I look forward to meeting this new lady. What showed up was not a lady. It was my wife. So, that's important because Churchill is important. Because who's the greatest statesman to live in this bureaucratic age where the engineering project to overcome man has become advanced? Lincoln sees it in Colonel, in Seed, in the Civil War. It's Churchill's theme all his life. Churchill is on a battlefield in 1898 in Sudan. The Mahdi of Allah, who is the grandfather of the current ruler of Sudan. And he founded the first Islamic Republic as we know it today. This Mahdi of Allah in 1895 is when he did that. The current ruler of North Sudan and his cousin, also a relation of this 19th century Mahdi, are the 2 chief teachers of Osama bin Laden. And Winston Churchill is in a cavalry charge against these guys in 1898. So first of all, his life is the weirdest thing you'll ever meet. He was everywhere. He was captured by the Boers in 1899, and the future president of the Boer Republic, Louis Botha, was in the region. And although he didn't capture Winston Churchill, Churchill decided that he did and would never believe, whatever evidence there was to the contrary, that anybody except a famous man had actually captured him. Churchill didn't like these Sudanese dervishes, they were called. But on the other hand, he watched modern weapons work on them. 70,000 charged, 25,000 British. They lost 11,000 killed in about an hour. The one that got nearest the British line came within 150 yards. And Churchill looked at that. You should read the book called The River War where he writes about it. And he's a young guy very much on the make. He's demonstrating his heroism so he can get elected to Parliament. And he describes this battle, and he describes in one paragraph, he describes the charge of the dervishes, whom he doesn't like. But he says how brave they are, and how the scene for them is heat, and bullets screaming, and people screaming, and horses screaming, and dust and smoke everywhere, charging through hell toward hell. And then he goes back to the British scene in the same paragraph, and he says, the infantry fired steadily and stolidly, because although they could hardly see the enemy, they still remained interested in the work, even if it became tedious. Soldiers carried ammunition cans, and others carried water jackets to keep the barrels from melting, Everybody moves like on a factory floor. And they killed 11,000 people. And Churchill has the imagination to ask, what if two armies come together, both able to do that? In 1925, he writes of the phenomenon. Mankind has never been in this position before. Without enjoying wiser guidance or improving appreciably in virtue, he has got into his hands at last the means of his own destruction. Death stands waiting at attention, waiting for a word from the frail being so long his servant, now for once his master. We wouldn't be worried about these Islamic terrorists. I mean, first of all, we shouldn't worry about them overmuch. The ones who are hostile and do aggressive things, we should kill them. But it's the possession of the worst kind of weapons that makes it the most formidable, because they'll probably use them if they get them. Their societies could never invent those weapons. But once they're invented, you might get them. Churchill thought that this phenomenon, that we're becoming so powerful that we could destroy ourselves. And Churchill is 26 years old when he first starts writing about this. Has its mate in peacetime politics. Churchill comes into the British Parliament at the same time as the Socialist Party comes into the British Parliament. And he fights it all his life. He said in 1945, these socialists who've been in coalition with me to fight the Nazis could not realize their ultimate aims without the use of a secret police. Yes, I mean a Gestapo. Said that after the war, when they'd been fighting these Nazis. And of course, historians are uniform in saying how stupid that was and how it was a reckless moment on his part. The truth of the matter is he said that over and over again all his life, and he said it many times after that occasion, even though he lost that election. Because I can tell you what he feared. I'll read it to you. About the Bolsheviks, he said, there's not one concept in the philosophy of the Russian Bolshevik which has not been realized, carried into action, and enshrined in immutable laws 1,000,000 years ago by the white ant. Equally startling developments lie already just beyond our fingertips in the breeding of human beings and the shaping of human nature. You know, if you watch the government acting now, it's been lawless for a long time. One of Churchill's favorite things to say was, if you make 10,000 regulations, you destroy all respect for law. But the new thing that's happened, that's emerged just in the last 4 or 5 years, is that now things are done in a lawless way that affect the relationship between the government and the people. That is to say, that compromise the ability of the people to influence the government. And I think they're calculated that way. Everything that tends to a control on human speech, which is the central human gift, which is a theme of the Obama administration since the day it started, and everything that affects who the voters are, so that the voters are not picking who the voters are. And so a government that's thinking like that maybe the people won't vote for us, but these things are right to do anyway, and we're going to do them. That's the line that looks to me like that's been crossed. And now look at the tools that are possible in the modern world. Equally startling developments lie already just beyond our fingertips. Churchill writes this in 1931. In the breeding of human beings and the shaping of human nature. It used to be said, though you have taught the dog more tricks, you cannot alter the breed of the dog. But that is no longer true. Human beings may soon be made, not birthed, but grown under glass. Do you know Churchill wrote this in the same year that Brave New World was published? But we know, because he wrote his wife about it, that he didn't read that book until 25 years later. He was thinking. We could interfere with the mental development of the beings who are now being born, or rather made, in a way to fit them to jobs that we want them to do. So what happened is, C.S. Lewis wrote that the power of man over nature can only be expressed as the power of some men over others. Winston Churchill knew that too. So what was his solution? Because what he thought, and he thought this, he left politics when he was 80 years old, and he'd been in more than 50 years. And he thought all these things at the start and at the end. And that means that we have a rich record of a genius about how to combat these kinds of politics. In war, what do? Don't fight unless you have to. Find a cheap way to win. Bring to bear overwhelming force. Those are his lessons. Strategy is the word. In peace, what do? Limit the government. Enforce the Constitution. Live under its limits. When you provide the social safety net, which he favored and helped to invent, people should invest in it. It should be a property that is their own and that they can count. In the British Times, they got stamp books from the post office under the scheme he created. And the taxpayer put in 2 pence, and the employer and the employee put in 7 pence, and every 6 months they got their stamp book full of stamps, and they knew how much money they had. Because he said, the way you take care of the poor is that they invest mainly in ways that will give them a stake in the stability of the capitalist system, and they will not have the taint of the dole because most of the money is theirs. You can't have 10,000 laws, he would say. You know, in America, the 2 changes to the American Constitution are the bureaucratic state and the entitlement state. You get rid of the entitlement state through savings accounts that people own. And you get rid, and that's what Paul Ryan proposes to do, and you get rid of the bureaucratic state by remembering that people are the best agents to take care of themselves, and there are plenty of laws already and old about what happens when you do something that harms somebody else. Churchill fought that war all his life. He's been dead 50 years in a few days, and it still goes on. What should we think? Should we be like Larry Kudlow and optimistic? Should we be like Heather and pessimistic? Should we be like Churchill? You want to know what his last words were in the House of Commons? In a speech about nuclear warfare. Never flinch, never weary, never despair. See, we have his lessons, and we're alive today, and the fight is on, and there isn't any reason whatsoever that it cannot be won. Thank you for helping.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Arnn. We have time for questions. We have students with microphones. Please wait for the microphones, and they will bring the microphone to you.
Thank you, Dr. Arnn. Steve Barney from North Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you again for delivering the wit and wisdom that you so often and generously give us. And thank you for bringing Heather McDonald here this morning. She spoke with truth and clarity. And at the end of her talk, she pointedly talked about the days when she was a student and she could read any author, irrespective of their pigmentation or plumbing arrangements, and said, you can't do that today. I hoped you might have a comment on that.
Well, thank you. That's the great Steve Barney of the Barney Charter School Initiative. And he's very generous and very smart and very good principled, but his greatest single gift is that when he gets sentimental, he cries out loud. Churchill loved to say of himself, "I'm a blubber baby." Well, the point is, we are the subject of an engineering project now. And here's the way we're regulated. Like that thing, I've been hearing it everywhere, and I think it may be true, that if you're selling arms and ammunition, which there's a right in the Constitution to do, and in nature to do, that it's hard to get a bank loan now. And the reason is the regulators are all over the banks, and all they got to do is just raise an eyebrow. Well, reading is like that, too. And so the government is getting into the business of picking curricula. And the plan in the Common Core is that the courses will go, each course, from Plato to Amy Tan. And you know, there's usefulness in education to survey courses that cover a lot of ground, although that's a very great deal of ground. But there's also usefulness to study. You remember what I said about Professor Jaffa? You know, he claims that he knew 3 books. And he was a very learned man, very profound man. And so when are you going to pick something great that is really great and teach them what it's like to know well something great? And that's banned. And we're not at the place now where some books are not allowed to be read, although the adoption of textbooks in America at the K through 12 level is dominated by 3 states, and they have politically correct standards. And if you can sell one of your textbooks to one of those 3 states, you've made a lot of money, and to all 3, and you're rolling. And so there's lots of controls now in this centralized way of doing things, whereas, by the way, an excellent translation of Plato's Republic can be had on the internet for free. So why do you need all that? And it's been proved. There's proof of it in Texas and in New Mexico, because the schools are old enough to have established some proof, and there'll be proof of it, I predict, in 3 years in Naples, Florida, that any bunch of idiots can start a charter school if they got the right idea about it, and they work hard, and they can get spectacular results. So why don't we have the freedom to do that? Why is the bias not in favor of that? Why is the college? And why are people who start these charter schools held up to public ridicule and suspicion about all this? Why did it happen in Bloomington, Indiana not long ago, that somebody said that Hillsdale College was not fit to be involved in such a thing because it was too conservative? And what is the thing that it wishes to conserve? The beauty of human equality and the rule of law and the culture and the arts that flow from those things. And if that's being bigoted, then I very much am that.
Tucker Anderson. I'm glad I finally got to one of these after 25 years. Got to see my friend Larry again. Two related observations, which I would like your comment on. First, none of these are unique to me. First, that in fact, in several very important ways, the ability of us to conduct the fight in which we're engaged should be made considerably easier by the internet and by the thirst for knowledge worldwide. And not just the battle in our country, but the battle on a worldwide basis. And second, in that regard, that it seems to be very interesting how individuals elsewhere who have not had the privileges that we have of being in a constitutional democracy are so hungry and interested in ideas which are being rejected here.
So, thank you. That's Tucker Anderson, who has been a friend of mine for probably more than 25 years, and a great guy, New Yorker. So the first thing about the internet, when I first came to Hillsdale College a long time ago, people would say, gosh, it's a really great college, but what difference can it possibly make? It's just a puny little place in the middle of nowhere. And I used to get that argument all the time, and I repudiate that argument because learning has a way, right? I mean, the taking over a negative and a positive example. Positive example. The schools where the leaders of the American Revolution were instructed number about 10. And the number of those key leaders who were crucial to the job number about 150. Others were important, but those guys, take them away, different deal. So large numbers matter, but also small numbers matter. Negative example. Progressivism came into America from German historicism through Princeton University and Cornell University in the main. And the numbers of people who began were like 10 and 12. And then it grew from place to place. So I repudiate the thinking that a small place can't make a difference. But I don't have to repudiate it by that argument alone anymore. Hillsdale College has 650 or 700,000 people who've taken online courses from it. How many in this room? You know, lots, right? I get stopped in airports now. It's a marvel to me. I can't figure it out. Because, like, class is really fun. But since I get a lot of class in my life, it wouldn't occur to me to watch a class on a computer screen. But, you know, more than 1 million times. And we think the upward potential of that is in the millions. And it's still growing. So there's that. And see, I'll hasten to add something. Like, it matters that Tucker and I have known each other for a long time. It matters that we've sat together many times and had a good talk. I know his ways. I know he's proud of where he went to school, all that stuff, although it's too liberal for him. And I know all that stuff, right? Well, things like that matter. You know, I'm married to Penny, and we're not married on the internet. We have a thing going on. See? And a classroom is a tremendous place. I want you all to come, because you should see what a college is like when it's still like what a college is like. And like, one of the best things I do in my life, apart from teach, is I eat in the dining hall with the students. And I sit across from them, and we're eating, and we're in our dining hall. And they know I'm going to torture them. And also, they tell me things, and I learn things, right? And that means that a few people can do things that very many cannot. But it's also proving true, Tucker, that if somebody's really good at doing those things that a few people can do, that can radiate everywhere, and is doing. And so there's great hope in that. I agree. And that's why it ticks me off so much that they took a dramatic and lawless step to socialize the internet last week. Okay, let me just explain what the step is. We have built the fourth branch of government, which is the regulatory state. It's much the largest part of the government. And so the theory that justifies it, if there is such a theory, is that we delegate, Congress and the president delegate both legislation and enforcement to agencies that specialize in particular areas. And those agencies also enforce the rules they make, hear disputes with their employees of enforcement actions. So they're the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. And that's all legitimate because they're ultimately under the control of the regular legislative process, and because no one part of the popular branches, neither the Congress nor the president, controls them. And so you've got, and you know, the number of people who work in this state and federal is about 20 million people. And so the idea it's all divided up and there are new kinds of checks and balances in it, right? But what's not fully understood is it represents a kind of government, a different way of doing it, justified by different principles. Our government, by consent, is justified by the fact that we can talk to each other. We have human souls, which is a reflection of the divine soul. This kind of government is justified by expertise and specialization. The one who knows. Who should decide whether 20% of the income of the American people is spent to relieve climate change? Should the American people make that decision, or should experts make that decision? And this FCC thing, what it shows, because the most powerful, I read in the Wall Street Journal, the most powerful lobbyists in America, these big telecom and technology companies, thought they had this thing so that they weren't going to do net neutrality, which is, by the way, just stopping people from selling something to the highest bidder. And with one speech, Obama turned it around, and it's going to be done in a month. And we know that Obama employed a man who's a law professor at the University of Chicago and has been on the cover of GQ. My, is he not pretty? Cass Sunstein is his name. And he says that the federal government should nudge people to have proper diversity on their websites on the internet. Is that what's going to happen? The fairness doctrine for the internet? The principles are laid down. Thank you, Tucker. Anybody else? Thanks. Oh, wait. So, one more.
It's a pleasure to have heard you. My friend Bill Lamoth of 50 years has talked a lot about you. I'd like to ask you a question regarding the rule of law. When it was obvious the Soviet Union was going to break up, there would be 15 countries, places like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and all of those, which would want to become democracies. And for them to become democracies, they take that sign on the wall which said General Secretary of the Communist Party of Uzbekistan. He turn it around, he's a democratically elected president of the Republic of Uzbekistan. So I began a conference. We'll have the 18th one this year. We've had 1,400 chief justices come and attend my conferences from 108 countries. Now I run into a problem. I was always able to distinguish the rule of man from the rule of law. The rule of man is you run an election, you lose, you put 10,000 people on the street, and you try to burn down the buildings. That's rule of man. Rule of law is you lose the election, and you go to the court reviews the election and says, well, you're quite right. But now I've run to a third option, the rule of Sharia. And I wonder if you could comment for us who are devoted to the rule of law on how we deal with the rule of Sharia, which is when the Supreme Court of a country decides a case, somebody appeals it to the Sharia court, and the Sharia court decides differently from the court. Thank you.
Did you say Sharia court?
Sharia law,
Yeah, okay.
and
Well-
there are Sharia courts, as you know.
Yeah. Well, so the first comment I'll make is, if you've entertained 1,400 chief justices from 180 countries, you, sir, have too many chiefs and not enough Indians. The second thing I'll say is the rule of law is a simple and beautiful conception and a direct derivation from the nature of the human being. All it means is that the rules are general in their nature so everyone can understand them. They're just these steps. They have to be made in advance so you don't know who's going to be affected by them. And then they have to be applied the same, generally the same, in all cases. And that's a big order. That's very hard to get that, because where the rubber meets the road is when, you show up in court and somebody knows Obama doesn't like you. And there's a whole bunch of people who are standing outside calling you a racist. And the media is ready to repeat the charge and waiting breathlessly for the verdict. And the Attorney General of the United States has threatened that if you're acquitted, you'll be arrested immediately on a state charge, on a federal charge. The rule of law means none of that makes a blind bit of difference. And that's a hard thing to achieve. And nothing so precious. The Constitution of the United States is the greatest protector of the rule of law in human history, and it is under assault, and everyone must fear. One of my favorite things to say in the last 3 years, and I said it at the board meeting yesterday, is we have to remember that we don't enjoy the protections of the law fully anymore. Now we have public opinion, we have the good order of the college, the excellence of its operations. We have the fact that we don't take any money from the government, which is a moral fact. It used to be a legal fact. It used to protect you because they couldn't regulate you unless you took their money. And so those are powerful things, and we rely on them, but they're not as powerful as the rule of law. And so we fear, and we wish to restore the rule of law. About the Sharia courts, it's a simple thing to understand what's going on in the world. What Larry Kudlow said was very artful last night. He said we should refer to them as totalitarian countries. But our country, and by the way, it just so happens Hillsdale College, both are founded on the principle of civil and religious freedom. And that means, and the reason the First Amendment is the most important of the amendments is that's the one that protects the specifically human activities. The Second Amendment is important, and it has to do with self-defense and defense of the nation. But a wolf can protect itself. It just can't talk about it. It can't worship its God. It doesn't know what it is or what God is, you see. So that regime is beautiful because it recognizes something essential in the human being. And also, by the way, it makes sense under the dispensations of both Christianity and Judaism. And the reason for that is that Judaism is a universal religion and a political religion, but it's not universally political. Only the poor Jews got chosen. And that's hard duty. Read the story of the Old Testament and find out whether it's really a great privilege to be the chosen people. But they're given a law, right? And only they are given that law. And that means that over them, that law comes from above and outside the political system, and you can't appeal against it. When God speaks, that's it, and he does speak. So Christianity is different. It's a universal religion, but not in any sense a political religion. My kingdom is not of this world. It tells you all kinds of rules of behavior. It doesn't give any laws, and it doesn't appoint any political bodies. No magistrates, no legislators, no executives. That's one of the reasons Jesus was killed, by the way, because they're impatient about that. They think they're going to get a conqueror. He was not. Now, I'm no expert on Islam. I just happen to be a fellow who can see. And I know that, like Moses, Muhammad was a general and a conqueror and a ruler. And I know that there is a law, and I know that this law, coming directly from Muhammad and therefore from God, is said to be sovereign, universal. And that places the people who interpret it in charge. If the mullahs want a thing in many countries, that is the thing that happens. And to appeal against it is to disobey God. And that means that that regime and the regime of civil and religious liberty are directly opposite regimes. And that looks like then that there's got to be a choice made, like in so many areas today. And everything hangs on the choice. And Bill Lamoth's been a friend of mine for 15 years, and I don't know a better man. Thanks.